When I think of connections, I think of an experience that my wife and I had, it was over 25 years ago now. We were newly married, and for some reason we got this crazy idea that we should be involved in a program where we hosted 2 adolescent boys from another country. And our sons were from Northern Ireland. We were involved with a group that was working with young people in Northern Ireland, and at the time, some of you will recall that that period in history was known as the Troubles. It was a very, very difficult time in Northern Ireland where Protestants and Catholics were at war with each other, where you'd turn on the news every night and there'd be bombings or assassinations. It was a very, very difficult time. Leon Uris talks about it in his book Trinity that some of you have probably read. But we hosted these 2 adolescent boys. We didn't know anything about adolescent boys. We have 3 of them now, so we're sort of experts. But we brought these 2 boys into our home, and part of the role was they were to share a room together, which they did. And so we were helping them unpack. And we began to notice some really interesting things. Alistair was our Protestant son for a summer, and Gary was our Roman Catholic son for a summer. So Alistair, as he unpacked his bags, everything was very neat and tidy. And as he started to hang things up in the closet, his side of the closet was full of browns and beiges and tweeds, very understated. Well, when Gary, our Roman Catholic son for a summer, opened up his bag, the thing just exploded with color. Just blues and greens and pinks and yellows and oranges, and all the different colors of the rainbow were on his side of the closet. We really had an experience when we went out and took them to the swimming pool for the first time. Alistair showed up in a traditional, just swimming trunks. Gary had a Speedo, which really, our next trip was to the store to our first acquisition. But there were also other differences. These 2 boys had never ever been in each other's worshiping communities. So, of course, Alistair had never been to a Roman Catholic cathedral. Gary had never been to a Protestant church. And so part of our experience was experiencing the differences of each other, but also the things we had in common through our summer together. I found out that adolescent boys eat a lot. We found out that adolescent boys are addicted to aftershave. I'm sure our home still smells of aftershave back in Pennsylvania. I found that adolescent boys can be sort of disrespectful when they want to be, and amazingly appreciative as they are most of the time. But the most interesting thing we experienced together was this, and this happened on our very, very last day together. I can recall so vividly, it was a beautiful day like today. We were driving the boys to the Pittsburgh International Airport where they'd go to their homes, back to their homes in Enniskillen or Northern Ireland. And as we got to the bottom of our long driveway, there was a highway out front, and in the back seat I heard Gary say, Jeff, stop the car. Stop the car. So of course I thought he'd forgotten something, and we were headed back to our home, but he opened the door and got out and he ran over into the ditch. And as he got back from the ditch, he came into the car, closed the door, and I saw he had a little 3x5 American flag that had apparently blown off of a semi-truck as it had gone by. It was tattered and torn and stained. But a 3x5 American flag. And in the back seat we heard him say, almost wistfully, "Oh, that I had a flag that I could fly one day." Of course, in Northern Ireland at that time, the flag was the Union Jack, the symbol of Great Britain, of empire. And it represented everything about power and substance and prestige and opportunity. You see, if you were a Protestant in Northern Ireland in that time, you had access to everything. Alistair went to the best schools. He came from a farming family. He knew what he was going to do with his life. Money was no object. Gary, on the other hand, coming from a Roman Catholic family, came from a family where his dad was a barkeeper. Now, his dad didn't own the bar because he couldn't in those years. He wasn't allowed to own anything, and the little house they lived in was rented because they couldn't own a home. And so when Gary saw the American flag, what he saw was something that he didn't have. He would have preferred to have the tricolor Irish flag, but of course that was outlawed. That was a symbol of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. Oh, that I could have a flag that I could fly one day. And so that experience for me, I think, was really the first experience, the really profound experience that I've had about what it means to be disconnected. There are lots of people in the world, not just Northern Ireland. There are lots of people in the world, in our country, in our state, in our city, that feel disconnected for various reasons. All kinds of reasons. There's a new author by the name of George Marsden who writes a little bit about this, but not in the way you'd think. He just published a book called The Twilight of the American Enlightenment. And Marsden's taking a look at the 20th century, which, for better or for worse, is known as the American century. And he's talking about what's happened in America over the course of the last 100 plus years, and chronicling all of the things that historians do. But as in his research, he began to notice something in the late 40s and the early 50s. He began to notice that there was an increasing division in our country. You can see it in the literature of the time. It was just starting to emerge. For example, if you're a sophomore in high school in the Dubuque Community School System, you've just finished reading Catcher in the Rye. J.D. Salinger's wonderful book of Holden Caulfield, right? Everybody's read it. It's about this feeling of feeling disconnected, or what Caulfield calls the phoniness of adulthood. You started to see it too in books like To Kill a Mockingbird and other very kind of famous novels at the time that began to provoke and make us feel a little uneasy with our easy way of life. And you still see it today. The Hunger Games is a great example of young people kind of struggling with what does it mean to belong? What does it mean to be connected or disconnected or engaged or not engaged or excluded? And he goes on to talk more about the way that we disconnect people. He calls it bifurcating the world between left and right, Republican and Democrat, gay, straight, black, white, rich, poor. And over the course of time, what happens, he says, in our country is we begin to gravitate towards a group, one group or another. That's where we get our identity, or where we feel like we can be connected. Well, we, as it turns out, have done a pretty good job of that over the years. But what's happened? I mean, you all experience it, as do I, that at no point in our history, really, have we as a country and as a people felt more cut off, more disconnected from each other. But Marsden has a solution. He's actually a Christian church historian. But he has what I think is an interesting thing that he invites us to think about. He says, what happens if we just accept the fact that maybe God created all of reality, or for our purposes today, created all of truth? But the catch is, as human beings, we only get to see part of it individually. In other words, I don't get to own the market on truth in whatever category I identify with. I don't see the whole picture. What's required instead is that I'm able to build relationships with other people and maybe begin to see a little bit of the picture that they're seeing as well. And through the process of building these connections with other people, we begin to see the fuller picture of that reality or that truth. I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about it. And he suggests that we need to do it, but we can't do it without a core set of commitments. And so here's what I want to end with today. I want us to think together a little bit about what 4 commitments, what core commitments are required for us to begin building bridges rather than building walls. What can we do sort of to work together as opposed to work apart? I think, in my own little thinking about this, that there are 4 key ingredients that help us connect together as human beings, as individuals, as families, as organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, as communities, as a state, as a country, and as a world. Just 4 simple things. They're going to sound like things that you learned in kindergarten, and maybe that's something we should listen to. Number 1, the first commitment, kindness. What would happen if we all just began every day by saying, what can I do? What kind thing can I do for another human being today? Just one thing. What if kindness permeated everything we did? That there were no ulterior motives other than just this natural inclination to be kind to each other. I think that's a key commitment, kindness. Listening would be number 2 on my list. My mother used to say, Jeffrey, there's a reason why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? You've heard that, now use it. Listening, active listening, requires a commitment to humility, doesn't it? Gosh, I know my arguments a lot better than you know my arguments, but I don't know your argument. I don't know your story. One of the things I've learned here that's absolutely powerful when I meet with students, and usually, I meet with them for fun, but sometimes I have to meet with them when they've had a little too much fun, if you know what I mean. And the first thing I ask them to do, and I didn't do this right away, and I wish I had, but I invite them to tell their story. Tell me about yourself. How did you get here? And you'd be amazed what you can learn just by listening to other people. So kindness, listening. Third one would be truthfulness, or what I would want to call integrity. What would happen if we abided in a way or lived our lives in a way where our yes was yes and our no was no? Where we learn the things that maybe we learned in kindergarten and actually practice them. We don't steal, we don't cheat, we don't try to take advantage of other people. Integrity. Being able to raise your hand and say, yep, that one's on me, or what do they say now, my bad, right? There's something very important about that. And finally, the 4th thing I'd want to talk about is something that I learned from one of my younger colleagues from listening. I said, Paul, if we have all of these things laid out in a project we were working on together, what's missing? What's the one thing that's missing? What does your generation really want? And he came back at me with this, an empowerment-oriented spirit, what I would call encouragement. What happens if we practiced encouragement every day in everything that we did? That doesn't mean that we give people a pass when they need to be corrected, but we practice it in an encouraging way. Those 4 commitments, I think, make all the difference in the world. A commitment to kindness, a commitment to listening, so humility, a commitment to integrity, to truthfulness, and a commitment to encouragement. So we practice those 4 things together as human beings in our interpersonal relationships. We practice those 4 things as a family. We practice those things in our respective communities. Here at the University of Dubuque, we practice those things in our state and in our country. I think that's what we mean by connectedness. And the beauty is, if we practice those things every day, not only does it change the world, It changes us for that world. Thank you very much.